So thanks everyone. We're just going to record this so that we can share it out on our website later, Nerdy Shop Talk, for you to refresh on, or for those people that can't join us today. So I just want to introduce you today to Nerdy Shop Talk. If you haven't been here before, like many of you, Julie and I have found that some of our best conversations that we have when we go to conferences, or we're just email exchanges, web calls, Facebook, all these things. The best conversations we have are those ones that are just sort of ad hoc. They just come up every so often. And we want to be able to share those experiences with others and let you sort of eavesdrop in on those conversations and hear what other experienced learning designers have to say. And that's sort of what Nerdy Shop Talk is about. Julie Dirksen is my co-host, and she's an instructional designer and author of the book Design for How People Learn. It's one of the best-selling instruction design books available. And she also runs a Facebook group with the same name.
Yeah, and Tracy Parish is my co-host, and she is one of those people who gets a lot of stuff done. She designs and she develops, and she's
all over the place.
All over the place, yeah. And you keep a really fabulous list of free resources for instructional designers, or resources altogether for instructional designers, that is on her website. So anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. This is a super interesting topic to me, and I believe that I mentioned this in the session description, that this was one of those things that has been under discussion since the very earliest days of any kind of computer-based training or computer-aided instruction. I was trying to remember back all of my historical acronyms from way back when, before we had web-based training and all of those kinds of things. Back in Chad's not that far from, we were just talking about Chicago universities like Champaign-Urbana, where they were working on Plato, and they were talking about adaptive learning back then. And it was going to be this sort of promise that the technology was going to adapt to what a particular learner needed. And that was the early 70s. So we are a full-blown 50 years on, and we don't have flying cars, and we don't seem to have that much adaptive learning. Right, CAI, CBT, all of those kinds of things, Judith, exactly. So first of all, why not? Because there's been, just a blossoming of things like recommendation engines and adaptive search results and all of these kinds of things. Clearly the technology exists in the world now for these kinds of things. So why has it taken so long to make it its way into learning? And kind of what can we do about it, or what are the sort of options to get started? But usually we start, without jumping in right to the topic, we usually start and ask our guests, what's something other than learning related or learning technology stuff that you're super nerdy about, Chad?
So I'm Chad Udell. Thank you very much, Tracy and Julie, for having me. I've seen you guys out and about. I saw Julie just a month ago or so at the DevLearn, but it's good to get back into the swing of having conversations. So things that I'm super nerdy about besides learning is I am very much a huge music fan, but I also am a music producer by hobby, and I'm really into actual synthesis of sound. So creating of sound from the ground up. What does it take? How do you create an envelope? What is attack, decay, sustain, release? What is a filter? How does it work? And how can I affect it in order to create all kinds of crazy sounds that people have never heard before? And then hopefully make something that's semi-listenable out of it. I'm still working on that last part of it, but yep. I have a lot of fun with it.
And I've heard some of it. It's quite fabulous stuff. And Chad is here because he's, I think I would say, and I would guess that Tracy would agree, that he's one of our favorite people who, when we talk about learning technology, really leans into the technology piece of it and is doing super interesting things in that. So your company Float, and you've got a new platform out that has adaptive capability called SparkLearn. And so we thought you'd be fabulous to talk to. We were hoping we were also going to be talking to Jennifer Solberg-Murphy, but flight schedules and family commitments intervene. So we will get her here some other time, but she's not going to be able to join us today. So anyway, Tracy, what do you want to lead off with in terms of questions?
Well, let's start with, so we were mentioning the Guild research report, and one of the things that, if you haven't read it, strikes out right away is that there's a difference between adaptive learning and adaptive technology. So maybe you could just sort of explain what the the difference between the two of them are for some of us.
Sure. So adaptive learning by itself does not require any technology to be inserted into it. You can partake in adaptive learning when you're just interacting with folks, right? I mean, we're actually adapting the conversation that we have, mediating and moderating what it is that we share basically all the time when we're talking with people. So that's why you might say, how many of you in this room know about X, Y, and Z? And then you're going to change what you talk about based off of X, Y, and Z in order to basically make a topic that resonates a little bit better or doesn't fly over the heads of somebody or doesn't bore them by being too simple and too easy. And if you think back even to like your school days, or say, for example, a job where you had a coach or a mentor or a boss that was really good at showing you the ropes, if you will, or a math teacher that helped you through algebra and when you didn't understand it, they're adapting the content based off of their interactions with you, right? And when we talk about adaptive learning technologies, essentially it's taking what we know about how people learn when instruction is tailored to their knowledge in that particular area in order to maximize the learning and make it more effective, perhaps a little bit faster, hopefully, but certainly with better outcomes in helping them learn more effectively through the use of that technology. So those are the key differences. One involves computers and algorithms and AI, and one of them involves parents, coaches, teachers, mentors, and so on, and instructors that are patient and willing to work with you, really.
Right. Well, even with the technology stuff, back in the day, I used to work at Allen Interactions, and we had the software training model, where they give you the software task. So you had to like open up the medical record in the software or something like that. And they just gave you the task. And if you could figure out how to do it and where to click on the screen, you could just do it. Or there was like hints, demo, like more instructions or something like that. There are a couple of different options of support. And so if you knew what to do, you could just do it. Or if you didn't, you could ask for a hint, or you could say, show me how to do it, or, whatever. And like, no single person went through that path exactly the same way as any other person. And so that was a case where, like the intelligence was coming from the person to judge, do I know what to do or do I not know what to do? And if I don't, what am I going to use to help me over this piece? But like, that's a case where the smartest person in the system was the actual user, and they could make their own judgments about, do they need more information or not? So I think that's another way to, like, I mean, yes, there was technology involved and that it was a thing, but it wasn't like the technology wasn't providing the adaptation. So if we go beyond that, what are some of the things that like the technology can now start to do to, like we move some of the intelligence kind of behind the scenes a little bit around what we're prompting people, or what kind of help or support or things that we're giving them.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, technology arcs towards becoming more accessible and more affordable, right? And so when we talk about why don't we have flying cars? Well, I mean, beyond just air traffic controlled, and you've seen how people drive on the road,
Yeah.
give them an extra dimension so they can go up and down. We're going to have fender benders all over the place. But when it comes right down to it, beyond just those types of constraints from the geometry and so on and so forth, the technology to build a reliable flying car is just still out of the reach of most manufacturers. Maybe Elon Musk has something in his Skunk Works labs or something like that. But like when we think about adaptive learning technologies, while the early example that you talked about as you were setting the stage, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana with Plato and things like that, those are multi-million-dollar labs.
Yeah.
And when we talk about all of the adaptive learning that took place, the research and development, the active scene between about 2006-ish, 2008-ish, up to about 2014 or 15, United States Department of Defense was doing a lot of research around adaptive learning. There were projects galore that were spawned around that time. The Intelligent Framework for Tutoring, or GIFT, I think it's Generalized Intelligent Framework for Tutoring for GIFT, was a massive project that was deployed in a lot of different test environments. There was a lot of work going on at Army Research Institute and so on and so forth. But those all take literally millions of dollars. Those are a lot of spend. That's a lot of money. And your average corporate customer is not going to spend that kind of money to bring technology in for learning, let alone, they don't want to even spend that much on broad-based information technology investments and projects. not just for training, right, but for the entire business. So cost is still an issue. That is coming down dramatically though right now. And I don't want to jump too far ahead of the script and things like that, but there are some things that are driving that down that if we want to, we can talk a little bit more about those. But I think a lot of it has to do with just accessibility and availability due to cost and ease of development, really.
Yeah. Well, and you know, so we have some questions we shared with Chad beforehand, but I'm actually like, let's go ahead and follow that thread. Like, what's making this like feel like it's in more reach in terms of cost or availability now?
Cloud technology has made things far easier. You can deploy new and emerging technology way faster than you ever had to before. When you had to depend on your own internal IT staff to spin up a server so you can install an application and get permission and do all of these types of things. Obviously, Tracy, I know that in your environments that you've worked at in the past, that would be like almost a no-go. Like that's just restrictive, right? Like, you can get time from IT like next month, maybe, or next quarter.
Yeah.
So when you can go to the web, put in a credit card number and spin up a service or something like that, like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud products, you can do that really quickly. Then furthermore, that computing power is far more powerful than the stuff that you probably have on premise. So you can cram a lot more stuff into it, more data, more content, more users, more bandwidth, more media, whatever else, all of the things that you need really in order to provide adaptive learning experiences, because that's one of the kind of like the little sticky widgets is if you're going to have adaptive content, you have to have a lot more content because there's going to be content that kind of hits the cutting room floor that some learners don't need. You're going to have other content where the people that are really hungry for more advanced information are going to strive and need. And so when you talk about those types of algorithms, that's a lot of crunching and numbers and things of that nature. And then when you add on to the fact that all of those cloud providers that I just mentioned, Azure, Amazon, and Google, all have AI or cognitive services available to you that you can use for processing and decision making. That is really, really powerful. And we're seeing that get even baked in now to commercial off-the-shelf products. So part of the burst and the burgeoning of where you go like to an exhibit floor at this point right now, an expo floor for a conference, and if they say they've got AI or if they say they've got machine learning in their system, if you have enough time and you have a conversation with them, ask them what's driving their AI, ask them what's driving their machine learning. And it's probably like a mix of either Amazon's SageMaker platform or Microsoft's cognitive services or some sort of Google AI product or something like that. Not many people are building it from the ground up because it's expensive, time consuming, and there's just far better solutions that are already out there. So I think a lot of it, the cost is driving down is cloud services, and with it, the cognitive services that can run on those cloud platforms. That's a big deal for us. So.
Okay. So those platforms that you just mentioned, are those like basically they're taking some of the things that are powering, like say the recommendation engines or something like that, and kind of spinning them out for more general use? Is that what's going on with that stuff, or is it something different than that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a mix, right? There's a mix of a variety of different AI technologies that might be at play. So like, for example, Google and even Microsoft's cognitive services are really, really good at what's known as natural language processing, or NLP for short. And NLP can be used to parse and index content in, say, for example, learning courses, articles, PDFs, Word docs, all the stuff, all the artifacts that we as e-learning instructional designers have to kind of schlep around and put into an LMS and do all those types of things. Those processes can index all of that content, find out where there are linkages, right, and semantic meaning and an ontology that can layer over top of it, so that you as a learner have a journey that can be made through that particular content. Now, a lot of that still is going to require some level of programming, but that programming is far easier than writing, core like raw C# or something like that. We're talking about some of these platforms. The new trend that I've seen is low code, no code, which is kind of like explode all of these platforms immensely. It's going to be pretty awesome. That's just on the horizon right now, though.
Okay. No, that's super interesting because I'm sorry, Tracy, do you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, like, with being able to do all that cross tabbing of courses and content and stuff. Like I've heard people, say adaptive learning is a lot like what Netflix for learning. But if I'm one of those people that wants to explore beyond my stream of information, is this adaptive learning, these contexts and these things where it's recommending what I should be doing? Am I going to miss all those other things?
Yeah, like create your own filter bubble.
Yeah. Am I going to start missing all the cake decorating and the landscape painting? and I'm just stuck watching whatever.
I mean, it certainly could. I think that a lot of it has to do with who's, in my opinion, it has to do a lot with who's manning the torpedoes or the rudder, if you will, of the system that the learners are living within, right? You want to give people a healthy diet of all of the types of things that are out there. You're likely, I hope, filling your libraries not just with, tasty cheeseburgers and things of that nature, but you're also giving them a fill of broccoli and nutritious items as well. And we want to be having people be able to pick and choose from those particular items. So, it certainly could happen, but I think that if you are cognizant of that and you're creating a wide range of stuff in your systems, maybe you get people that actually are willing to try that extra thing that they wouldn't have been normally put on their plate. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Which actually, there's a question in the chat that I think is actually a super good follow-on on this, which is Andrew's question about how do we reconcile the ideas and implementation strategies that learning should be more personalized while also recognizing that learners aren't always the best judges of their learning progress. So this like pull versus push, I think a lot of the recommendation pieces and stuff are supporting the idea that like we're going to serve up stuff that's useful to you and you will hopefully then pick it up and do something with it, right? As opposed to now this is your next required module. And so, I don't know what I think about that. I mean, I think it goes both ways, right? People just sort of exploring resources by definition means they're probably not going to get to everything that you necessarily think that they should get to, but they're also going to be looking at the things that they feel interested in or they feel are useful to them or, things like that.
Yeah, people are kind of bad in general at regulating their own learning processes. They need some wayfinding. Maybe they need to find a way to get to that next shady spot where they can take a breath and figure out what's around the bend or around the corner. Maybe they need some tools inside of their platforms that allow them to do things like set goals. That's always good. I think maybe some friendly little nudges and reminders like, hey, Julie, you didn't finish your broccoli. Time to come back and go through the rest of this course. Or, hey, Tracy, we got a whole bunch of new stuff on making cakes that you're probably going to really love. You should get back in here when the system recognizes that the learner's journey has kind of stalled out or something like that. All of those are kind of almost above and beyond the concept of adaptive learning. And those are more about like the same sorts of social triggers and triggers that we see in social media platforms. Like, I get a notification whenever anybody mentions me on Twitter. That's going to pull me back into Twitter. Does a pretty good job at it. I'm always going to check it out, right? Or if someone favorites my tweet or likes it or whatever else and stuff, I'm going to dig back into that. Why don't we put those same sorts of triggers into our platforms, adaptive or otherwise? It's just a good, probably trigger, design in order to get users.
Then we're going to have all the learners upset that we're tracking their learning and tracking where they're learning. And let's not start that, right?
Well,
yeah,
you're going to have that if you've got adaptive learning systems. You're putting a lot more data out there and you're grabbing a lot more data. And that's one of the things actually that could be a bigger area of holding it back, is because like enterprises, the governance and the privacy laws, especially as we see what the European Union is doing and some of these other laws that are popping up in states like California, even Illinois, I think New Jersey, all have these privacy laws that are popping up about what companies can do with their employees' data and who owns it and so on and so forth. Like those could really stall out the growth of adaptive learning potentially, especially if the data is not managed properly and there are some incidents that would be unfortunate. So.
Yeah, and there's privacy and ethical concerns, which I think are a different conversation for a different day. I wanted to just loop back to one of the things you were saying, though, that I think is really interesting. I think it's sort of in addition to adaptive, or maybe it's a little bit of a tangent, but but that's what we do. We follow the conversation. You were talking about the natural language processing thing. And I have a funny thing where I was, one of the big issues I think with most of the e-learning environments is when we get into any kind of assessment of anything, it's all fundamentally recognition based right now. Like we rely really heavily on multiple choice questions where I'm giving you choices and you have to like choose them and things like that. So almost everything that we're doing in online learning, except for maybe stuff that's happening in virtual classroom, is fundamentally they're recognizing an answer whenever we're doing some kind of assessment thing. They're picking it from a list of choices, or they're picking a path in a branching scenario, or things like that. And so the idea that we can actually have people generate answers and then give them some kind of feedback on the answer that they generate. So what are you going to say to this customer when this happens? Type out your answer, and that the computer can actually like give them something meaningful about the answer that they typed out is super interesting to me. And my story about this is I'm always like, oh, well, we don't have that yet, but of course, if we did, blah, blah, blah. And I was doing a workshop at Google and I was like, wait, you guys might have it.
They probably do. Almost.
Yeah. Although I don't know that it's made it into the training department, but I could be wrong. So
one thing that's really kind of cool. So I use at work here, I use a platform called Grammarly. Does anybody in the audience here use Grammarly? You guys use Grammarly as a product? So Grammarly is not just a grammar checker and a spell checker, but it also is a writing style assistant, and it can analyze what it is that you're writing for tone. And so one of the things that we use it for here at my companies is to make sure that everybody that's writing customer facing language or marketing text all uses the same types of tones. They want to be confident, but not pushy. They want to be smart, but not geeky, those types of things, right? And when we talk about that, that's called sentiment analysis. We could apply those types of processes to the fields in those free text entries that you're talking about, Julie. So like Grammarly actually just opened up their API. So you can build Grammarly's sentiment analysis and grammar analysis into your third-party products. There's a fee for it. Of course, it's not free or anything like that, but we're definitely looking at building those types of things into our product because, again, it allows us to get out of the elevator at like the 10th floor as opposed to like having to go all the way up the stairs to get to the 10th floor. Like I'm gonna take that type of path just about every single time.
That is super interesting to me. Okay, I don't know if I'd still call that adaptive or not. There's Judith, I promise we'll come back to your question too, but there's a question from Patricia about when we use the term adaptive learning, do we lean more towards AI versus machine learning? And I'm not sure entirely how to parse that.
So, I mean, I guess I would say getting to the root of it, and I don't want to, overly dominate the conversation, so I apologize, but I am talking.
You're the guest.
You're here to dominate.
So artificial intelligence by itself does not infer that there is machine learning, but machine learning even by itself requires some form of artificial intelligence because it's a subdiscipline or subdomain inside of it. And so the core difference is that AI by itself is something that is probably very heavily trained by a human in the loop, meaning the human sets the data, moderates it, runs the process on it, analyzes the results, either likes it, doesn't like it, and then modifies the data set in order to get to the results that they want, okay? Whereas machine learning is removed, at least to a certain part, once the data set is primed and the network looks to be functioning as they want it to be, you can remove that person and have the machine start to train itself because it's smart enough. There may be another additional adversarial network that runs over top of it to parse through the data sets as it's being ran through that neural network in order to determine, is the data still valid? Is it still good? Am I in a good feedback loop or am I in a bad feedback loop, and how do I adjust it? So it doesn't necessarily, adaptive learning doesn't need machine learning, and it doesn't really even need AI. That's another thing. Like, I know that's another part of our conversations. We automatically, we're jumping to the shiny object because it's the shiny object and it's out there and it's really cool and it's exciting. And we hear AI like on every other commercial at this point, it's like AI for testing your golf clubs, or AI for, I don't even know, like AI cooked this hamburger, whatever, probably. But you don't need to do adaptive learning. Like I said before, we talked about it at the beginning, you don't even need a computer. So certainly if you're going to add a computer in it, you don't need AI. You can do AI with just some simple rules-based, decision-based, logic trees, branching scenarios. You mentioned those before, Julie. Like if you've got time and you've got instructional designers and you've got hands-on keys, you could build an adaptive learning platform completely out of Articulate storyline courses. It'll take you a while, don't get me wrong, or it'll be very simple because there won't be that many choices and changes and things like that. It won't be able to be robustly adaptive. It'll be like kind of adaptive on rails or something like that. But you don't really need machine learning. You could have it be a combination of some rules and some very simple deterministic algorithms. Deterministic algorithms meaning it's very easy to somebody that knows a little bit about that algorithm or that equation to determine and view what the possible 3, 5, 17, 25 different solutions are. Something that's more AI based is by itself stochastic or more random. Like it's harder to analyze what actually is going on underneath the scenes. The joke inside of AI creation in general is like insert data, question mark, question mark, question mark, third step, profit, like maybe the question mark is the underwear gnomes, like that's the running joke, but that's what happens. And that's not necessary to do adaptive learning. So Patricia, I guess what I would say is when we use the term adaptive learning, right now we're leaning more towards AI in general, with on the far curve of the most advanced systems being machine learning, but we don't even have to jump all the way back. Like we can start out with simple if then else types of logic trees.
Yeah. When you talk about rules based, can you give some examples of that?
Yeah, so a rules-based thing could be like, if this person works in this facility, skip over this module because it's not relevant to them. That's not where the fire department is or the fire exit is, right? Like that's a really simple, dumb thing. Like it could be as simple as those types of things. If this person has worked for this company for less than 6 months, make sure that you include the culture module in their onboarding process. If they have been here for more than 3 years, don't give them the corporate company history module anymore because they're going to be bored as all get out or something along those lines. Like it could be as dead simple as that, rules based. It could also be things like if they've looked at this content within the last 3 months, don't give it to them again. If they haven't looked at it within the last 12 months, put it back on their plate, or something along those lines.
Look at all the adaptive learning I'm doing. I didn't even know it.
You're building it out. You're doing it.
So
you're doing
far
it
ahead of the game already.
You're doing it manual size style though, right? Hands-on keys
with a pencil.
we had one that we built in Flash a number of years ago that was, like on the post test, depending on which questions you missed, you just got prompted to review certain, like if there were 12 modules and you missed questions that were related to module 3 and module 9, you'd get prompted to review them before you could come back and take the test again to get a passing score or something like that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of ways to slice it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, and you could do like other rules-based type things would be depending on how complicated your systems integrations are. So let's take, for example, sales training. So if you've got a bunch of salespeople in a cohort and they're going through things, and you've got some high performers and you've got some low performers, and you can see that they're high performers based off of the results that are being logged inside of the customer relationship management software or CRM, like Salesforce type system. And then you've got some that are low performers, and it's the system Salesforce is sending data back up to the LMS, letting them know this person's made their quota every time for the last 3 months. This person has never hit their quota. Well, they're going to get the sales basics courses. The other people are not. And that's a rules-based type of decision. Doesn't require AI, doesn't require any sort of algorithm at all.
Mm-hmm. But it does require a certain bit of data about the user that can be present in the system to make some of those choices.
Without a doubt. And that's one of the bigger problems, really. So like, as over the years, we've talked about big data for learning, right? And we've talked about the use of algorithms and AI for learning. And part of the problem in learning why we haven't gotten adaptive technology to really ramp up, or AI in general to ramp up, is that we honestly don't get that much data about our people. I don't know if it's because of the fact that we're down the hall, or we're not getting invited to the right meetings, or we're not the cool kids, or we just don't have big enough budgets or something like that. But oftentimes we don't actually get enough data about our learners to be able to provide them a decent or good adaptive learning experience in the first place.
Well, and we had that issue with SCORM, right? You know very little from SCORM about what your learners are actually doing in these environments. So you get maybe completion status, quiz score, if you're lucky, time on page or something
That's
like that.
not
But
enough.
but you need more. Yeah, you need to know more about what they're doing or more about their backgrounds in order to be able to kind of do the sort of rules-based stuff that you're talking about. So that's there's a piece of that up front, if you want to do something like that, where you have to have some kind of profile of who this learner is, what they've done before, so that you can actually apply those rules.
Convincing the right people that we need that data to do those things. Because so often, those that deliver this content want to know that stuff. And those that we're doing that content for, they just go, I just want to know they finished it. I don't care that. Sometimes they care that they actually learned something and they can go and perform whatever task they now need to do. And other times it's just show me the check mark that it's done.
Yeah, and maybe it's on us. Sorry, maybe it's on us that we have to go back to the enterprise and show what the business value is. Like, why do you need all this data, Tracy, to make our training better? Well, what's it going to get us if you make our training better? We're going to reduce time to competency or reduce overtraining by 40%. What does that mean in man hours? Well, across our 500 employees in this particular work group, that's going to result in roughly 32,000 less training hours spent per year or something like crazy like that, right? Like, you're going to have to probably put some big, hairy, audacious goals out there in order to make the business case to get access to the type of data that you're going to need in order to provide those types of experiences. And then you actually have to you got to live to it. You got to do it. So don't sandbag the numbers, but kind of reach,
When we're doing budgeting, that's always the number that I feel like that gets left out of it, right? People want to know how much is it going to cost to develop this course or something like that. It's like, okay, it's 100,000 to develop this course. Do we get enough value out of it? And it's like, well, but if you develop a garbage course and you make 5,000 people take it, it's an hour of bad stuff that's useless or useless. Like, that's 5,000 paid hours of employee time. All of a sudden, that $100,000 investment to do it right doesn't seem that big. You know what I mean? Like, compared to,
very true.
You're paying, however many dollars an hour, especially if you're dealing with knowledge workers, they're expensive. So that, an hour of their time is a lot of money. So interesting. Okay.
I like to stay away from the concept of ROI in general, just because it is so difficult to. But in some regards, this isn't even an ROI type of question. It's just like, what do you think the core business value is of getting access to this type of information? And you have to provide at least some sort of business case. And that could result in reduced time on task or something like that. I'd be very reluctant on saying like, you're going to save X dollars or X this. I wasn't inferring that that's what you were getting at, Julie.
No. Yeah, no, I agree.
Logical extension that an analyst is going to want to jump on it and be like, how many dollars is that,
So would these learner profiles be something that, just getting back to the technology piece a little bit, is that an LRS thing? Like, you built, like, you store those as XAPI statements about this learner and can kind of construct a profile out of that, not that back end piece is the most critical thing, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the data structure, schema, and storage, as well as retrieval and querying that is available inside of Experience API, is meant for capturing massive amounts of data about the learner, their experiences and their interactions and engagements inside of the system, far more than SCORM. And it's also a schema that's very similar to other activity streams that take place in the broader enterprise. It's not too far off from like what an experience stream looks like from even a social network. Like, it's been a while since I've had a look at the Facebook data stream, like APIs and what it actually looks like, but it's a very similar sort of object notation at its core. Julie did this, Julie liked that, Julie posted this photo, Julie shared a live video, Julie commented on Tracy's picture of her nephew or something else like that, right? I mean, very, very similar. And there's a large volume of that content. Yeah. And so that's what we actually do need in order to start to paint a picture of our learners, is that kind of wealth of data. And it could be XAPI, but it could also be some of these other systems, these systems of records, an ERP, a supply chain management system, a CRM, et cetera. If we can take a look at the usage patterns, start to say, like, it looks like people are foundering on this third screen of the order entry process, we should be building content around that. okay, well, let's put some content out there. Then take a look and, oh, everybody that went through that module, that's about that third screen, is their time on task has been reduced, from 1.5 minutes down to 45 seconds. That's a pretty good improvement. That's what we want. And there's less misentries, and the misentries result in things being shipped to the wrong place, which then is a farther, you know what I mean? Like all those types of things, can be mediated and remediated, based off of getting more data about the learner's activities, not just in the learning systems, but in the systems that they're using.
Right. Oh, super interesting. So when it comes to some of the technologies and things like that, are there things that you sort of feel like are out there now that people can take advantage of, or is it really going to be, a little bit more roll your own, or, how are you feeling about that stuff?
Well, I'm a little bit biased because I'm a vendor in the place and I have a system that does some of these things. And I know that there are a number of other products out there that are in the marketplace that also have adaptive technologies in them, in some way, shape, or form. Like, my product is called SparkLearn, but there's other products that I think Exonovai has some levels of adaptation in it. Area 9 by Lyceum has some. Docebo has some. Like there are a lot of products that are out there that you can taste test and try. But I really do think that the best is yet to come, because most of the folks that are building things at this point are still dealing primarily with one of the forms of adaptive learning, which is macro adaptive, as opposed to which takes place basically outside of the loop of the activity. It's the concept is get the people through the content as quickly as you possibly can, in order to get them back out on the floor and get them selling or get them working or whatever else. Most of the systems that are out there don't have a micro adaptive aspect to them, which is inside of the loop of the learning activity. How do I make sure that Julie is truly getting it? And part of the problem is, I think, and Julie, I've heard you say things, I think you probably agree with me, is that taking a test doesn't actually mean that you know how to do the thing.
Right.
And so until we have straight up, like almost close to one-to-one instrumentation of the system of record, a CRM, order entry system, et cetera, and the learning experience, it's going to be very difficult to close that loop and figure out how to make a micro adaptive system that isn't just marketing. And furthermore, a lot of enterprises may not actually even want a micro adaptive system out there, because this is where I put my cynical Chad hat on, is that a lot of businesses don't honestly care if their employees learn. They just want them to do their jobs and do their jobs faster and more effectively, and that is a macro adaptive learning loop, right? It is.
Yeah.
We don't want our doctors or our pilots or our other skilled professionals that are going to be cutting on us or doing other types of things, not knowing how to do their jobs. However, if the guy that's out there, working in the Lowe's or big box home improvement store, I should say, I don't want to show any preference, big box home improvement store garden department, we don't really necessarily care if he understands exactly which fertilizer of these 5 that we sell is best for people with loamy soil versus this, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be like, they're going to ask a question, be like, which fertilizer should I buy? You'd be like, what color's your dirt? Light brown, dark brown, really dark brown. Get that kind.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that really is it. Does he know why? Does that person know why? No. Does he understand the chemistry behind it? No. But the person that's creating all of those needs to know it and would probably benefit from a micro adaptive system.
Sure. Well, and I have what I usually refer to as the sports and things where you can kill people conundrum, which is, we understand invisible skills. So sports, we're very clear on that. And we understand in places where you can kill people, so pilots or doctors or whatever, we understand that you can't really learn the skills in this area without practice, right? And we have mechanisms set up for people to practice, and we have feedback mechanisms for them to get feedback on their practice, right? In all of those environments. And then we move over to something like leadership or management or, all sorts of cognitive skills, where we don't seem to have the same understanding of the need for practice. And so that's a really interesting area for me for this. Really kind of comes down to that feedback loop. Is there any way that people can actually practice doing the thing and get some kind of meaningful feedback on it?
For sure. So like if you sit in front of a mirror and just swing a golf club for hours and hours on end without looking at that feedback, or potentially even having somebody else, or take a look at those hours of you swinging the golf club, then giving you feedback, and then having you remediate and fix, you're not learning anything. You're just doing something badly for hundreds of hours.
Yeah, and I mean, even with golf, you can go out to the driving range and you see how far your ball goes, and did it go in the direction you wanted it to go. So you at least get that kind of visible feedback in that system. But if you are doing employee feedback, you might see that the employee did not take it well, and I guess that would be a form of feedback. But a lot of times you don't know how it's received. Like the person, this is your subordinate, they're not going to immediately tell you that was a bad piece of feedback that's not helpful to me for this reason, because that's not the power dynamic in the relationship. And so you can, there's no visible necessary way to tell if, am I doing this well or am I not doing this well? And, obviously there's more variability and ambiguity in feedback than there is in driving a golf ball, but no, okay.
But are you seeing this kind of adaptive learning in that kind of learning environment where it's somebody swinging a golf club, or is it just somebody sitting in front of a computer taking a course?
Well, I can speak from, I don't want to speak too much because she's not here and she wouldn't be able to tell me that I'm wrong, because I'm probably half wrong on how I describe this. But Dr. Jen Murphy, who was supposed to be the other guest on here, has a lot of experience in adaptive systems, specifically around skills-based training. And she did a wealth of work around marksmanship and using adaptive systems to improve people's marksmanship skills, which is obviously a very necessary skill if you're going to be a marksman or be an infantry or be out there on the battlefield. And her technology that her team had built and designed in conjunction with some analytics tools that used triangulation and accelerometers to help analyze the posture of the shooter as they were doing their task, all fed into an experience API data set, right? And so they're getting constant feedback in the system, like these numbers aren't looking right, or this posture isn't looking right, or whatever. And then the instructor is feeding back to the marksman, or they're even getting some semi-automated prompts through the system itself. And I don't know if there's some show notes. I can try and get that link or whatever from her paper.
We'll just have to do a part 2 to this.
Yeah. I don't want to steal her thunder. It's a brilliant a bunch of research and stuff, but it's all skills based and it's all micro adaptive, because obviously you want to, again, to Julie's point, if people can die, you want them to be able to do that skill very well, right?
I want to make sure we get time for Judith's question in here. If you I don't know if we're gonna, what looks like the most value added use case for adaptive learning implementation? If I had to make a business case for a training organization to invest, what do you recommend as ways to convince leadership? We sort of been talking to some of that, but I don't know if there's anything more you'd want to add to that.
What moves the needle in your organization? Yeah, so is it lower defect rates? Is it customer service outcomes? Tracy, what's a key metric of performance at your organization that you guys always focus on?
Oh, when it comes to training, it's always going to be money, like you said earlier. Like, yeah, beyond the you're not going to kill a patient kind of thing. Sure, it's the hours required and the time and cost involved in training.
Is that needle the same? Right? Is that needle the same? Or sorry, is that needle moved by the same criteria across all departments? The money thing, meaning, so is it in billing or in accounts receivable and paying and that probably department? Not. What moves the needle for them is probably different than in the building services and facilities or the janitorial services or something like that, right? So there's differences there for each one of those. So all of them, the outcome is they're trying to either increase the money that comes in the door for the accounts receivable and make sure that all those things get covered, or janitors is like, stop wasting so much cleaner, dilute it differently, or work more quickly, or blah, blah, blah. Like there's different types of things that they're trying to do. And I think to Judith's question would be, if I had to make the business case for a training organization to invest in, what do I recommend? How do I convince that leadership to make that thing? Would be take a look at the biggest opportunities that you have to swing a needle, whether it be customer outcomes, fewer defects, or whatever, and pick that one thing. Pick that one thing and use that.
Yeah. And how do you do adaptive around that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's going to be different based off of whatever that type of task is. So if it's knowledge based, it's one thing. If it's skills based, it's another. If it's something that's going to benefit by just getting them out on the floor faster, choose this particular type of adaptive strategy. If it's something where they need to know how to do it correctly and not everybody does, I would use a different type of adaptive strategy. So I think it's going to be highly variable based off of your outcome. So unfortunately, Judith, the answer is it depends.
It usually is the answer.
An adaptive report for your adaptive learning argument.
So if I give you an exemption from vendor talk, accusations or whatever it is, do you want to tell us a little bit about like what the adaptive pieces of Spark Learn are? Because I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
You're kind of what you're working on.
So we have our platform is primarily focused on the use cases that are like mobile and micro learning. So on the go learners, people that are kind of away from their desk for long stretches of period of time, or don't even have a desk, they're a frontline worker for whatever reason, et cetera. So a lot of the work that we're trying to do is reduce time to competency. So we're focused around that macro adaptive loop and how can we get people through a course, a curriculum of content that might either be remedial, below them, or just unnecessary for whatever X, Y, and Z reason. And so we built an adaptive platform around there that does have some pre-tests and some qualifications. So we can take a look at hire date and whatever the HR department's providing us, we can take a look at that and then kind of put them into a flow a little bit maybe ahead, again, getting out of that 10th floor of the elevator as opposed to having to go all the way through the steps. Or we can offer them the opportunity to kind of test out of certain aspects of the content or training, especially if they've shown competency based off of some pre-tests or quizzes that are in there. And so we are really focused around that. And then furthermore, what we like to do to avoid some of that filter bubble aspect that we talked about real briefly at the beginning of it is we have a taxonomy system and a way to relate courses or content to other ones that they haven't seen. So they can indicate what topics they're interested in. Our platform is really focused around the self-regulated learning aspect. Like people should be able to pull from a menu and learn what they want inside of this library, but you can create your own filter bubble very easily because Tracy could say, I'm not interested in anything but making cakes.
Mm-hmm.
Give me all the cake baking courses, but don't give me anything about pastries because I am not interested in that. But if you take a course and it just so happens that pastries, the way that you have to thaw the butter is the same way as a cake. I am not a baker and I don't make pastries, so it's probably wrong. But if it were the same and they shared that same sort of semantic linkage, if you view enough of those types of things, it'll say, hey, Tracy, are you also interested maybe in just making some pastries? We're seeing that you're doing some things that are pastry related. And then maybe at that point, Tracy would be like, you know what? I am looking at that. That would be cool. I should learn how to make some croissants. People love those.
Mm-hmm.
And so so that recommendation piece, does that learn from what, like, is it one of these, because the story I always have on this is the very earliest Amazon recommendations I got. So my favorite version of this is I sent a friend, I bought a copy, a friend of mine was moving to San Francisco and I bought a copy of Tales of the City for them, which is about like San Francisco in the 70s. And it's little tiny short stories because they were short, like installments of the story because it was originally published in a newspaper and stuff. But it was written by Armistead Maupin, who is well-known in like, well-known sort of gay literary icon. And so Amazon decided that I was interested in male gay fiction, which, was completely wrong. There's some lovely, gay male fiction out there in the world, and it's a delightful thing. But, I not actually being a gay man, I didn't need quite as much of it as Amazon was convinced that I did.
Yeah.
And I was just like, how do I uncheck this box? Because a little goes a long way with me, I'm just saying.
Yep.
And so like, it was basically the recommendation engines at that point were pretty stupid.
They're a little
But
aggressive.
but once they got more into the like people who read this book also read these books, or people who bought this also bought these, it felt like it got a lot more useful. And now I feel like it's over egged because I get this, I buy one set of Christmas lights and I get 9,000 more Christmas light recommendations. And I'm like, no, I bought the Christmas lights. I'm good. Yeah, you know, my favorite one was I looked at a toilet and I was convinced I needed 9,000 more toilet recommendations, and I'm like, how many toilets do you think I need, Amazon? But
yeah, I mean that's certainly an opportunity. There's certainly a chance that those type of things can happen, right? But I think the way that ours is wired up, I mean, one, you would have to have an enormous amount of content about toilets, not just to continue the metaphor, in order to keep getting continued recommendations about that. Because let's think about like how your learning system is typically structured. You're not going to have that many courses about one singular domain. And there's only, if there's an organization's viewpoint on how a chicken sandwich should be assembled, once you've looked at that course on how to assemble that chicken sandwich, there's no other courses on chicken sandwiches. So we're not going to, you like that course on chicken sandwiches, so we're going to give you more of those courses on chicken sandwiches, which is one of those ways where the Netflix of learning metaphor kind of starts to break down too, right? You're not going to get more recommendations for this. Like in Netflix, if I watch one anime show, like I watched the Gundam series, now it thinks that I want to watch Cowboy Bebop, which I do, but that might be an exception to the rule. Like I'm not going to necessarily go down this path and be like, oh, I have to watch all these other, you know, series or shows or something like that. And then furthermore, we always give an opportunity for our users to be able to undo things. There's a profile screen. They can always change their interests. They can always reprime their recommendation engines. It's essentially an undo of sorts, right? So that you can get taken off this list. It's like, stop this train, I want to get off, you know? So kind of got to give opportunities for users to manage their own data as well inside of these systems. Because like we said before, we're getting a lot of data about them. They're generating a ton of data. And if they don't have the ability to control that data, you're taking away their agency inside of the system and their ability to actually tailor the recommendations to what they want to see.
No, that seems super important. That's really interesting. Okay.
Well, one more question maybe, and we're almost at the top of our hour here. So we have portrayed, we want to talk to you all night long, Chad.
Yeah.
And we might offline, but are there existing adaptive learning strategies to support the design process? Or do you feel we can use existing design models, Merrill's first principles or
Gagne's 9 events?
Yeah, 9 events.
Gagne's or Gagne's, is that a transposition? It's usually GN. I always thought
no, yeah.
I just maybe it's somebody else that I hadn't heard of. So this is where this is where I'm probably going to zip my lip, because I am not, that's sorry, no problem, Patricia. You don't need to apologize at all. I am going to zip my lip because I am not an expert in that. Julie, you mentioned that I'm a technologist. I'm a technologist and a designer by trade and at heart. I went to school for graphic design. I do not have a master's of science in instructional technology or design or anything like that. And so I don't know.
This could lead into the part 2 that when we get Jen back, because she might be able to speak to it. You know, I know some people who did a lot of research on flashcard implementation. And so if you get a flashcard wrong, we tend to put it on the bottom of the pile, you know, like if you're literally using flashcards. And there's actually some good data about memory that says what you really want to do is you want to see that card again pretty quickly. So you want to put it like maybe 3 back in the deck. And so then when it comes back up, you still remember what the right answer is and you can get it right. But then we want to reinforce the right answer over the wrong answer. So we want to put it 5 back in the deck. And then after you get it right again, we want to put it like 7 or 10 back in the deck. And so what you want is like, that's a much better, and that could be very definitely an adaptive system based on whether you get a card right or wrong. You know, it changes its location in the pile to reinforce the right answer quickly and then give you some progressively spaced reinforcement on that right answer. So there are, and I know that some of the people who have done, Caroline said about Duolingo, they definitely got stuff like that. Like if you get something wrong, it's going to show up again quickly and then it's going to get spaced out. And so there's some stuff there that likely applies to, versions of adaptive learning. And I'm sure Jen has thoughts on that piece. So like I said, we can loop her back in at some point.
Sure she does. Yeah. And I do like to at least take a back seat when I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't, because it often results in very humorous results if I don't shut my mouth at least. So, yeah.
Well, that is totally fabulous. And so, adaptive learning is not necessarily going to be clippy, but for learning, and well, I suppose clippy always wasn't a learning thing, although it was looking at your, it was kind of based on performance and stuff. It's interesting how reviled it was and what the better version of that is going to look like. The actual performance support tool that sort of prompts with, based on those things. But
oh, I have one more thing. Why is adaptive learning taking so long to take root? Okay, so this is kind of cool. All right, and your Clippy for Learning thing spurred me on for this.
Oh.
Perfect.
Everything is always something for learning. A Netflix for learning. VR for learning, an Oculus Quest for learning, a Tesla for learning. I don't even know, like what, I mean, there could be all kinds of, because we always say, take this technology, which is successful somewhere else, has been market proven and has a business model and so on and so forth. Let's transpose it into learning and see what we can do with it. A Robinhood for learning, a Clubhouse for learning, blah, blah, blah for learning. The reason that succeeds is because, again, there's investment, there's traction, there's an idea, and so on and so forth. Adaptive learning may actually be the only emerging technology that is created and really only has an application in learning. And because there's not that much money in learning, people will tell you that there is, but I see the results on Crunchbase and I see where money is getting spent with these venture capitalists and stuff like that. A lot less is spent in learning, including even the very large segment, which is EdTech, that gets a lot more spend really than corporate training does. But all of those get a lot less spend than any of the other market segments for technology. Virtual reality, so on and so forth, right? Blockchain, yada, yada, yada. Blockchain for learning. Okay, well, there's no other real adaptive learning. They don't say this is like adaptive learning for electric vehicles. Or this is adaptive learning for this. Like, people aren't taking technology out of the learning space and because it's successful there and moving it elsewhere, right? So the equation of how investment happens doesn't favor a technology that is first and foremost for learning being successful quickly, because less money by definition is spent over on this side.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's really cynical.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, the only reason we have VR at all for learning is because we're piggybacking on the technology that was developed for entertainment.
Yep.
We wouldn't have anything really to speak of if it wasn't for that. Carolyn's got one last question, but I think we do need to wrap up, but let's just do the super quick version of it. She's asking about the role of IA. So I'm assuming information architecture, in addition to AI, like how, and I think that goes to things like how important content tagging is. Oh, intelligent agents. Sorry, apparently that's my bias about what an IA is. I think information architecture, but intelligent agents. Yeah, no, that's okay. Well, do you have anything on that, Chad, or should we kick this one to the next?
An intelligent agent is essentially an embodiment or a personification of an AI. That's really what it is. I mean, Siri is a voice on top of a bunch of AI processors. It's not generalized AI, but it is certainly pretty broad-based, because as soon as I ask them about one thing, it takes me down this path. There's a decision path, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to learn about weather, or I'm going to learn about the music, or I'm going to learn about this thing, or whatever else. So absolutely, is there a role for IAs in addition to AI? Think about adding an intelligent agent of voice or voice response or natural language processing over top of your LXP, or into your mobile application, or into your LMS. Heaven forbid, but your LMS could end up having Alexa built into it next. You never know.
Yeah.
And it still won't understand what I'm saying.
Alexa understands fine if you only ask her for 3 things.
Yeah.
So, what I've really done. All right, that is fabulous. Thank you so much. This has been super fun. Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah. Is there anything else we can let you shamelessly plug before our session?
Yeah, absolutely.
One last thing. So if you are interested in emerging technology, I have a book that came out in 2019. So it's a couple years old at this point, but it's called Shock of the New. And it is a guide for evaluating emerging technologies. Of course, we talk about adaptive learning and AI and blockchain and a whole bunch of other types of things in there. But the cool part about that book is it's technology agnostic, and there's a rubric or a framework that you can use to evaluate any new and emerging technology in your enterprise to see if it's a smart choice for your business to try out and pilot. It's called Shock of the New.
Yep, and I don't think I can quite reach it without, otherwise I'd pull it out, but I do have a copy. So
It's easy to Google.
It's
yeah.
right here. It's got
there it is. There it is.
It's on
Mine's right up-
ATD.
mine's right over
It's
there. I
an
just can't reach it without
ATD.
taking.
It's an
Mine's
ATD
here
book. So it's
somewhere.
also on td.org. You can get it at Amazon or at td.org.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us today,
Yeah.
Chad, and for everyone that participated with us and helped us with the questions today. We really appreciate you coming by.
Super. Thank you both
Yeah.
so much. Thanks.